It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Depeche Mode podcast. This week's show is brought to you by Mack Weldon. Go to mackweldon.com. Use the promo code MNW and get 20% off your first order. We'll have more details on that a little bit later on in the show this week. Also brought to you by Embark, the all-new science fiction novel written by Jon Justice, available on Amazon.com for 99 cents as an ebook for a limited time. More details later on in the show as well. It is a Depeche Mode podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here for the last show in the return of the show for 2019. Hey, Maya, 2018 as we head into 2019. Holy cow. My apologies for last week's show. This week's show is going to be much better. If you listened to last week's show on A Broken Frame, I'm going to go back and redo that show at some point in time because A Broken Frame deserves more credit than it got for the way that I did it. I tried to experiment and do something different, and in my opinion, it just didn't work out. So for those that downloaded it and listened to it, I really do appreciate the fact that you did, and I'll go back and do a better episode of that sometime in the near future. But again, I tried to record my commentary on A Broken Frame, and it just didn't quite work out the way that I had hoped. But I'm glad you're back this week, and this will be the last episode for this year with the holidays. Just right around here, about a week out from Christmas when I am recording this, and I'm going to be taking some much-needed time off from everything here in the next few days as I wrap up my work week on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130 and 103.5 FM, KTLK here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I host a weekly radio show. So look, this week it's all about construction time again. And in preparing the notes for the show, I got really excited about talking about construction time again as I began looking over, listening to the album and looking over the tracks. There's no new news to report about the band, apart from the continued releases of the box sets for the vinyl box sets, of which Construction Time Again and Some Great Reward were just released. So this really fits in well with the timeline of what little the band is doing right now when it comes to merchandising. They're obviously taking a time off. Hopefully, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, that the rumors are true and that we will be getting new Depeche Mode content in the next year or so as they head back into the studio. And I hope the band does that. As they get older, I don't personally think that they're really in the best position to take these 4-year hiatuses again. They all seem to be in good health, but they're not getting any younger. And I would love to see some new content. Obviously, right? We'd all love to see more Depeche Mode content. And I'll be frank, and this fits really, really well with the commentary around Construction Time Again. I really do hope that whatever their next album is, that they go back to something a little bit more traditional when it comes to the songwriting. And I do love Spirit. I think it's a fantastic album. It's taken on a whole new meaning and perspective for me in the wake of the current political discourse here in America. And, what's going on in Europe, too. If you're listening overseas to this, if you're not in the United States, certainly with the controversies going on right now with Germany, with Brexit, the politics overseas along with the politics in America they're divided. They always are, but certainly highlighted because of the ability that so many people have to access and use social media to make their opinions known. That the album really does take on different meaning for different people and is very quintessential Depeche Mode from the standpoint of it's ambiguous. You can kind of apply lyrical content to what's going on around you in the way that you see fit. That being said, Spirit is an incredibly political album, and I really do hope for their next release that they return to more of the traditional, love, lust type of content that we're used to. Which brings me to Construction Time Again, and why this fits so well, not just with the vinyl album releases that have been going on, but also I do consider Construction Time Again to be their most political record release next to Spirit. I mentioned this when Spirit came out, that to me these albums really complement each other really well, not only being bookends of a career, because Construction Time Again is also the release where the band really began to get its footing. We now have the core four of, Gone, Gore, Fletcher, Wilder, and arguably the makeup of the group that's created the best Depeche Mode music that's ever been made. And this was their first full release together. And it's a transition album that looks back but also looks forward. In a strange way, it's almost a greatest hits of brand new material. Because as we'll go through track by track, there are elements of A Broken Frame and even Speak and Spell in the songs, while giving us a preview of what was to come, all with this interesting political bent to the whole messaging, if you will, or the lyrical content. Not to mention, we have Alan Wilder being used in the songs in ways that we don't see in any of the other releases, which I think is really interesting as well. This is the companion piece to Spirit. And listening, and I've done this before, I've listened to both this album and Spirit back to back, and it creates a very interesting, 2 hours, little less than 2 hour listen between the two records, and a nice little encapsulation of the band doing something they don't normally typically do. The band releasing lyrical content that is not atypical of what you're used to with the bulk of the rest of their releases. So we'll start off and I'm not going to include any audio with this show this week, only because YouTube keeps dinging me, and I get all these notifications, and I don't not want to have the podcast up on YouTube, and my fear is that it's happened before, where if I use too much music, they end up yanking it down, and that's no good. So grab the album itself, play it in the background while I run through for the next 20 minutes or so, kind of give you my thoughts track by track on Construction Time Again. From a personal standpoint, this was an album that I discovered after I discovered the band, obviously after it had been released, having come to the band at Shake the Disease, getting Black Celebration, and then going back to their back catalog. This was one of those ones where I wanted to get everything I could of Depeche Mode in my hands, and getting Construction Time Again was one of those gifts. Certainly had a bigger impact on me than A Broken Frame and Speak and Spell, and an album that speaks to me way more than those first two releases. If I'm looking at the release order, this is the first Depeche Mode album that I really started to really love and go back to over and over again. I don't find myself gravitating back towards A Broken Frame very often. Very rarely do I go back and listen to Speak and Spell, but I go back and revisit Construction Time Again often. And there's one particular track on here that to me is just definitive Depeche Mode. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So starting off with Love in Itself has the vibe, in my opinion, of tracks off of Speak and Spell. Pacing and instrumentation. But it also has the darkness and the mood of the band moving away from the pop stuff and moving closer towards Black Celebration. It's almost like if you're standing in one place, you can look one direction, you can see Speak and Spell off in the distance, but you look at the other direction, and you can see Black Celebration off in the distance. Certainly some great reward much closer, but I even take Love in Itself and push it further down to Black Celebration, and then you're right there in the middle. Here you are with Love in Itself. This was the band finding its voice, Martin finding his voice, and the band finding its way. More Than a Party is a track that to me defines that late 80s, and a song that I listened to a lot off this record, even though it's, in terms of styling and the way it sounds, is really one of those tracks that I'm trying to think of a good example. Better Days is a good example. When you look at some of the B-sides of In Your Memory, More Than a Party feels more like a B-side to me, as does the next one as well. But it's got the sampling that they just really start to get into. To me, this whole album feels very experimental. The whole album feels like the band is really just messing around with sounds and experimentation to find out what it is they want to use. And a lot of this stuff, while not throwaway, it does sound very experimental. And certainly these next two tracks, whether it's More Than a Party or Pipeline, if you were going to companion More Than a Party with anything, I probably would put it with something like Master and Servant. Like, More Than a Party is sort of the redheaded stepchild to what would become, was like the stepping stone to a Master and it's one of those tracks for me, and this is just from a personal level, that this was a time when I was just beginning to discover partying, right? Going out with my buddies and getting a bit of that rebellious streak in me, moving away from my parents and getting out on my own. This song had special meaning for me in that regard. Even if the lyrical content wasn't necessarily about what I was reflecting from the song, it still had that impact on me from just a more than a party, and hit me on a very odd emotional level, right? And that's something that this album does as well, is that, a lot of the other music that Martin Gore would write and then subsequently Dave would write later on, does sort of more directly hit you on an emotional level. Like, that was the intention. I don't think the intention of a lot of these tracks on the album were to hit you on an emotional level, but More Than a Party at a very young age in the late 80s certainly did that for me. Pipeline is a song that I'm not going to say that I necessarily like or go back and listen to very often. I will say that it is a song that was kind of a watershed moment for me. And it was a song that told me that music was a lot more varied than I realized. Being 46 now and being in my teens, listening to Pipeline, hearing this minimalist track, the lyrical content of it, it was one of those songs where I went and said, I shouldn't be liking this, but I am liking this. This is a weird song, but oddly I'm attracted to it. Pipeline was that song for me. And it wasn't one that I would revisit because it was slower and because it was more foreboding and brooding than anything we'd heard before, and because the lyrical content didn't necessarily touch a chord with me, except for the fact that it did open up my mind a bit to what music could be and what I could actually enjoy. Like, Pipeline gave me the opportunity by setting the stage, and again, this album does a lot of that, by setting the stage for what Depeche would do later on for similar tracks. When you get to music for the masses, and you look at To Have and to Hold or I Want You Now, which are songs that absolutely that I could relate to at a young age, especially when that album came out, and we'll certainly get to that when we end up talking about music for the masses next year. Pipeline laid the groundwork for that and opened up my eyes and kind of forced me to examine what I liked about music, my biases to music at the time. Because at that young age, and I think a lot of kids are like this, we kind of get these ingrained biases for a lot of different reasons of songs that we decide we're not going to listen to because we don't like that genre of music. And as you get older, you strip away those biases. And I find myself, as I get older, liking songs that I hated when I was younger, and it was because I had these weird biases that were attached to it that I didn't allow myself to go and like it. And Pipeline was one of those songs that broke down those barriers and biases for me. Now, of course, you get to the big one, and that's Everything Counts. And what else needs to be said about Everything Counts? It's quintessential Depeche Mode. If you're going to put together a greatest hits, you have not done that if you don't include Everything Counts on that album. Again, interesting considering the fact that when you look at, say, People Are People, Everything Counts in terms of content, not songs that are about, love, lust, and what I really love about the band. Again, more political in nature, certainly in lyrical content, but just quintessential Depeche Mode and a fantastic song. One of those tracks that you didn't, and that's an interesting thing too, as I work through these tracks when it comes to Depeche Mode, is that, at a younger age, being naive about the ways of the world and just liking a song for the way that it sounds, you don't really think that deep about the lyrical content, and especially at an early age when I first discovered Construction Time Again. And so those biases don't necessarily kick in. I wonder, a song lyrically like Everything Counts, you put it today, what kind of reaction you get to it, or what kind of reaction that I have to it. Look, I had biases towards Spirit because of the political content of it. It didn't seem to matter back then. It was just a strong, great track. The video's not very good, but it's a video that I'll go back and watch over and over again because the song is so good. One that still translates just amazingly live. Everything Counts does. I mean, there's not enough good things to say about this song and how this was the band finding itself and striking gold early on. Moving forward, you have what I like to call sort of a trilogy of tracks in Construction Time Again, where these three songs to me really fit together and don't really fit the mold of any other Depeche Mode. As a matter of fact, looking at the rest of the album, there's really only one song that to me fits into sort of typical Depeche Mode, because I can't really point to any other Depeche Mode songs on any other album, maybe some B-sides, that have anything familiar with these next two tracks. 2 Minute Warning, Shame, and The Landscape is Changing. It's probably just me, and I would be very curious to hear from you if you wanted to leave a comment on YouTube or drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. But to me, these next three tracks, while I know they're Depeche Mode, they feel oddly not like Depeche Mode. And they weren't songs that I necessarily gravitated back towards. And I don't really know why, because it seems kind of silly. Every track on Some Great Reward is quintessential Depeche Mode. But when I look at 2 Minute Warning, Shame, and The Landscape is Changing, and don't misunderstand, these aren't songs that I don't like. I do like these songs. But they're just so off, in my opinion, the beaten path from what we're used for Depeche Mode, that, and I don't know why that is. And maybe I need to spend a little bit more time on that. And I'd be curious if you have any kind of reaction to any Depeche Mode songs, or what your feeling are towards these songs. This album, again, just fits into sort of this idea of experimentation. And it's fun. So, and I'll apologize, because maybe I didn't formulate this well enough when I was doing my notes. Because all that I wrote is 2 Minute Warning, Shame, The Landscape is Changing are a trilogy inside this album. Like, I almost feel like these three tracks should be their own EP. Right? That's what it feels like, especially coming off of a song like Everything Counts. But this whole album is about experimentation, in my opinion, and the band finding its footing. I guess what I mean to say is Construction Time Again doesn't have a level of cohesion. And that first time that we see the level of cohesion, and then we do for the rest of their career, comes with the next release. That's what I'm driving at. And again, this stuff's all subjective, and you probably disagree with me. I'd be curious if anybody does agree with me. Speak and Spell was its own thing because of Vince Clarke and his time with the band. A Broken Frame was kind of its own thing, having to find its footing after losing Vince Clarke. Alan Wilder not joining the band yet, so you get a strange hodgepodge. Now you have the band. This almost comes off like a band in, not even a first album, but a band in transition. What are we going to be? And again, 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the future, and in my opinion, the album never reaches this level of cohesion. Look, even when you look at the artwork itself, this looks like artwork that's a combination of A Broken Frame. I mean, it's Martin Atkins, so you got the same, right? It's the same guy that did I'm pretty sure he did the artwork for this too. You've got this guy with this mountain peak with the hammer. You've got these images that, on the one hand, are kind of evoking A Broken Frame, but on the other hand, are kind of evoking what we end up getting with some great reward, and this one is stuck right in between. Almost like the album should have been called Transition Time Again. Although, that being said, the fact that it's called Construction Time Again does really make sense if this is the band laying out the foundation. And to me, 2 Minute Warning, Shame, and The Landscape is Changing is the band experimenting with lyrical content, experimenting with the writing process, not really thinking about creating an album that has any sort of commonality. It's kind of all over the place, and tracks that don't really fit into the rest of the Depeche Mode catalog. I would never include these tracks on any quintessential Depeche Mode listening. Right? To me, these are tracks for the hardcore fans. And I could be on an island, and feel free to go and tell me if I'm wrong. You get to a song like Told You So. Now, Told You So, we're back to Depeche Mode again, in my opinion. Told You So, we're back to the band experimenting, but with something that's a little bit more akin to the rest of the album. More akin to Everything Counts and Pipeline, and certainly more than a party. And I'll also admit, though, that now another issue with this, okay, could be the fact that my exposure to the band at the time revolved a lot around, too, the live release of that VHS. Was it Hammersmith Odeon, right? Where I remember that was one of my first concert. I wish they put that out on DVD or Blu-ray. That would be fantastic. But The World We Live in Live in Hamburg, right? Is that what it was? It's been so long since I've seen it. But I was so exposed. I mean, I spent so much time with that in and of itself became like a Depeche Mode album for me. Much in the same way that 101 did. I mean, those are, those really kind of had the same impact at an early age. Lesser extent to Devotional and the live album, even though I think they were trying to go for something similar. But when you look at The World We Live in and Live in Hamburg, and you look at 101, to me, those really complement each other really, really well. Much in the same way that Construction Time Again does so with Spirit in terms of the lyrical content. But again, those biases that seep in, Landscape is Changing, Same, and 2 Minute Warning aren't songs that I had much connection to beyond the album in and of itself, while Everything Counts, Love in Itself, and Told You So absolutely did. All right, before we continue with the rest of talking about Construction Time Again, and we get towards the end, these last two tracks, and add some commentary, I do want to let you know that you need to go to MacWeldon.com, right? Mack Weldon's mission is simple: to make sure that all your bases and beyond are smartly designed for shopping, and are smartly designed, and shopping for them is easy and convenient. Mack Weldon is better than anything that you're wearing right now. They want you to be comfortable in what you purchase from Mack Weldon. They believe in a smart design with premium fabrics and simple shopping. Again, you go to the website. Even if you're like, well, I don't know if I'm what I need right now, go to Weldon.com. You'll find something that you need. And trust me, I've worn Mack Weldon t-shirts and socks, and they are spectacular. You feel so good wearing them. Underwear, socks, shirts, undershirts, and hoodies. And again, they want you to be comfortable. So if you don't like the first pair of whatever you purchase, you can keep it, and they're still going to give you a refund, no questions asked. And right now, just for listening to the podcast, if you go to MacWeldon.com and you enter the promo code MNW for My Nerd World, MNW at checkout, you're going to get 20% off your first order. So go to MacWeldon.com, enter the promo code MNW, and get yourself 20% off your first order. And again, whatever you order, if you don't like it, and trust me, you're going to. Their stuff is fantastic. You can return it, and you can tell them, they'll refund you, and you can actually keep what you bought. How sweet is that? All right, so back to Construction Time Again. And Then is a song that I love. It's a long track at 5 minutes and 40 seconds, but it's worth every single minute of it. And to me, is the song that, we'll say, starts the trend, okay? Because this was the follow-up last track, because I'm not going to include Everything Counts, even though we'll talk about that, the long version. But this is the song that kicks off what ends up becoming a staple in Depeche Mode albums, at least for me, and that is the closer. The closing track, the opening and closing track of every Depeche Mode album from A Broken Frame forward, starting with this one, because you can't get to the next one without this one, right? Is this amazing trend the band has on every single release. And Then complements The Sun and the Rainfall so well. And then moving forward, every closing track on every single Depeche Mode album, and then absolutely fits the bill. Again, it's different. I can't really equate And Then to anything they do in the future. It doesn't really feel like anything they did prior to it. This whole album stands a bit on its own of the band finding itself. But just an amazing capper to this record. And it sounds like I'm complaining about the album, and I'm not. I do like Construction Time Again. I like it more than A Broken Frame, and I like it more than Speak and Spell. But in my opinion, this is a band that had not found its footing yet. And this album needed to happen. Just like the other albums needed to happen. Or we never would get what comes next. And that's why I'm excited about moving forward into the new year with the next releases, because from Some Great Reward forward is when the band, hits their stride and then never looks back, despite the hiccups that we'll get to when we start covering the releases after Alan Wilder leaves. You can't get to Some Great Reward, which is an amazing release, without first going through Construction Time Again and A Broken Frame and Speak and Spell. Construction Time Again, though, with the final track of track 10, Everything Counts, the long version, kind of tagged in on the end. I think that's more. I think that was probably marketing. I have no evidence of this. I have not read through all of Monument to know if this was covered, but I assume that the long version of Everything Counts was included to round the album out, so it wasn't just 9 tracks. Something you would normally get like with a remix and and a different kind of release. The end of the album is And Then. It's not the long version of Everything Counts for me. That's just an add-on. If I'm listening to the album, putting together a compilation and going from album to album, then I'm stopping Construction Time Again at And Then, because we already got the regular version of Everything Counts on track 4 of this release. So to me, it's a 9-track album, and I almost wish that they would release it that way. Because I think, it's got something similar to Violator in that sense, which is an interesting comparison as well. Take this album and its 9 songs and then put it up against Violator and its 9 songs, and you have a really interesting sort of history lesson with Depeche Mode, especially if you were introducing the band. That would be an interesting way to do it. Be like, hey, listen to Violator, let me know what you think. And people are going to love Violator because Violator is a masterpiece. Okay, and then here, go back and listen to Construction Time Again. This is a really good representation of the band in transition on what they sounded like before we ended up getting the magnificent Violator. That would be a really interesting way to introduce somebody to the band. And look, with that is the end of the show for this week, and the end of the show for this year. I hope you're enjoying them. This is this particular show that I do, of all the stuff that I do, whether it's my Star Wars podcast or obviously my regular radio show, it's just because I love this band so much, and wanted to do a podcast, and I will continue to do the podcast as we work through the rest of these releases, and hopefully we have some new Depeche Mode material or new news to talk about in the new year. But that's it for this week. Thanks so much. I hope you had a fantastic holidays and a great end of the year. We'll talk to you again at the start of 2019. Go out and buy my sci-fi novel, Embark. It is, if you like Depeche Mode and you like science fiction, you will love Embark. As I've mentioned on previous episodes, the character is a Depeche Mode fan, even though this is set in the future, and I filled the book with a lot of different direct and indirect references to Depeche Mode. And I just know if you're a science fiction fan and you like Depeche Mode, you'll really love Embark. It's available right now at Amazon.com. You can get it for a limited time. You can get the ebook for only 99 cents. Paperback is $12.99. Free on Kindle Unlimited. In the future, flight culture has replaced car culture and the world is at risk. Our hero, Taft Guardia, fights with his friends in their flying machines that are space-worthy for humanity's future and the girl that he loves. How much more Depeche Mode can you get? So go get it on Amazon. Search for Jon Jon Justice and Embark. I know you'll enjoy it. That's it. Happy New Year. We'll talk to you again next year. Bye.